Hi again, wonderful people. Thank you once again for visiting my channel and for taking the time out to take a look at another one of my videos today. And since I have been on this little bit of a series of videos dealing with Hebrew Israelites, or the topic has been with Hebrew Israelites, kind of scattered about with some things biblical, examining different features of the Bible or different belief systems that are out there, especially in reference to the biblical God. Here now is yet another video, because of course there are people who come into the comment section and there are certain things that are said. I try to respond to people there, but if I can't, I then try to see if I can make a video that touches on these things that people are talking about or that they're asking about. So, here's going to be the first thing. Now, people may wonder why I'm doing these videos. I think I've explained it before in the past, that there's no necessarily any rhyme or reason. Just so happens to be that I love to discuss religion. I've always been this way. I was once a Christian, so I was always involved in debates. I was always involved in back and forths online as far back as 1998 when I first came onto the internet. I think it was 97 or 98 when I first came onto the internet, long before social media, long before Facebook, long before MySpace. I used to be on bulletin boards discussing religious topics, so this is not something new to me or something odd. Now, the Hebrew Israelites, they were some of the people that I got to know relatively early when I got onto the internet. So the Hebrew Israelites did not come to me or come into my scope like something recent. You know, yes, I lived in New York City, so I saw them up there quite a bit, at least that group, you know, Fifth Avenue group. I think it's in that area up there. You see them around New York City here and there. And I didn't live too far away, believe it or not, in Harlem, where I think they have a church. If you want to, if that's a term they use, I really don't know. I think it's on Fifth Avenue, off 125th Street. So I live not too far away from there. So I used to pass by there all the time. I saw them outside. I saw them in their clothing, their religious clothing, and so on. So saw them there. But prior to even meeting them or knowing about them, I used to know about a congregation in Atlanta, Georgia, because one of my friends, she's no longer a part of the group, but one of my friends, she was a part of the group, and she used to come to me and ask me questions all the time. And at the time, I was a Christian, but she was still a little wishy-washy and did not know if to put her full vested interest in the group. But yes, she was a part of the group. So she would come to me and ask me questions. And I'm like, where are you getting these questions from? And she's like, oh, I'm a part of this church. And when she mentioned it to me, I decided to look into it. I actually joined their email thread. Their email, I guess you can say, sending things out to people and whatever. So I used to see a lot of what they believe and what they thought. And I used to ask questions. And I used to get blown off. You know, like, I guess they were wondering, like, who is this Judas among us? You know, like, why is he asking these questions? But remember, I wasn't a part of their group. I was a Christian at the time. So my questions were always kind of probing, trying to find out, what do these people believe? They're a church. I did not know. I thought they were just another church, but within, the realm of Christianity, until I started understanding what they believed. And I was like, oh. So I got to know about the Hebrew Israelites as early as that. But then I had another friend of mine who was all over the place, but this was one of the most intelligent guys that I ever knew. And he, just like us, we went to church together, we grew up together, but then we went our separate ways, and he ended up, I think, joining the Nation of Islam, and then he gravitated over toward something along the line of the Hebrew Israelites. And the next thing I know, he was with some fellow by the name of Malachi York, who I think is in prison, or he's dead by now, I really don't know, but he was another guy out there with some really off-the-wall beliefs. Somewhere there in Atlanta, Georgia, he had a compound and all that stuff going on. So this is how I got to know more or less about the Hebrew Israelites. I'm not saying Malachi York was one of them, but they kind of fall under the same umbrella: Nation of Islam, Hebrew Israelites. on at least one level, it's that we need to make black people look better. We need to make black people feel better. So we have to come up with something that gives blacks something that they can hold on to identify with, that they can be proud of. But anyway, that's what's going on, or that's what was going on back then. More recently, I have a cousin of mine who is a Rastafarian. We're both from the island of St. Thomas in the Caribbean. So I grew up with him. Of course, I grew up around the Rastafarian religion. I know what they believe. I know what they're really all about. I used to hang out with them a lot of times. Many family members, they were just around you. Just a part of our society, But I have this friend of mine, this cousin of mine, and what is really interesting, and he may see these videos someday, but what is really interesting is that he is more or less just getting into the internet. I guess you can say over the past 5, 6, 7 years, at least that's what he said to me. He's just kind of getting into the internet, and he's finding all of this information out there, and he's just blown away by it. So a lot of the stuff that he's mentioning to me, these are things that I've known for 20 years now, but he is now just finding out about all these things. But he happens to live in a world with an internet world today that is more social media, where things fly around the internet so fast, and there's just so much information just coming at you, sometimes not knowing what to believe, what to grab onto. We live in a world nowadays where it's very easy to be deceptive on the internet. You can just throw anything out there and it could just go viral, and before you know it, people can just be believing a whole lot of things without much study put into it. Well, he happens to live in that world. So because he's a Rastafarian, he is pro-African. But not surprisingly, he has come to me and he has mentioned certain things to me that are quintessential. I shouldn't say quintessential. It's more or less like all these beliefs kind of emanate from one thing: making black people feel better about themselves, giving us something to hold on to, something we can be proud of, something we can cling to and say we're unique in this particular thing. They all spring from that, even Rastafarianism. It's all springing from the same place. So he comes to me, and almost every single day he fills up my my inbox with things that are pro-African. I have no problem, but a lot of the stuff I look at, and you can just tell it's just a little bit over the top. There's a lot of talk in there about Africa becoming one, but he looks at it more on a spiritual level. So when he comes to me, he would say certain things to me, and when he would say it to me, he would be like, "Hey, do you know that black people are the true Israelites? We're the true Hebrews." And this is where you can find where the basic teaching intersects and crosses over into different groups. Because while he's telling me that, the Hebrew Israelites will be saying, "Right on, brother, that's right. We black people are the true Israelites. We're the true Hebrews." But then, this is where they start to separate. Because Hebrew Israelites may believe something else. He believes that the tribe of Judah is actually Ethiopia. He believes that's where the New Jerusalem is going to be. He believes that Ethiopia is the place where all the glorious things about the nation of Israel that is written is going to be fulfilled, and that's where it's going to end up. Hebrew Israelites don't believe that, as far as I know. So you see how it goes? It's like they converge at the one idea. We are the true Israelites. And then once you start getting down into the nuts and bolts, same thing happened in Christianity. And I'll explain that to you in a minute. Once you get down into the nuts and bolts, you start to find out divisions and different ideas and different thoughts, and they're all over the place, things that are completely contradictory to one another. But on the surface, it sounds great. I say that because when I was a Christian, and I used to work at a very large company, there were people I used to meet, and it's like, "Hey, I'm a Christian." It's like, "Hey, you're a Christian?" "Yeah, I'm a Christian too, man." "Hey, great. And you're feeling good that you just met somebody who's camaraderie. "Hey, you're a Christian, I'm a Christian." And like one day you sit down with them and it's like, "Well, I believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, and I believe that he is God himself." And no, I don't believe that. I'm a Christian, but I don't believe that. I believe that Jesus is separate from God, and I don't believe that in the Trinity and whatever. And you're like, "What?" And you're like, "You don't believe in the Trinity?" And they're looking at you like, "You believe in the Trinity? Don't you know there's a pagan belief?" And And then you have other things where it's like, well, we believe in going to church on Sunday. I'm a Christian, and the person saying, I'm a Christian too, but I believe it's only Saturday. You go to church on Sunday? Don't you know that was something that was done by Constantine, and he changed the time, and it's supposed to be Saturday? And so once you just go on, leave the umbrella of just Christianity, and you go underneath the hood, you start finding out all these crazy differences. And I'm seeing some of them even within the Hebrew Israelite group. Now, I don't know all of their beliefs and all their teachings and everything like that, but I've noticed even just from the comment section on my videos, they're Hebrew Israelites who don't believe in the New Testament. Like, they're like, the Old Testament, that's it. We don't go into the New Testament. Then you have other groups who are like Old Testament and New Testament. That alone right there is going to create a whole bunch of problems. So if they have to sit down, it's going to be like, yeah, I'm a Hebrew Israelite. Yeah, you're a Hebrew Israelite. Yeah, I'm a Hebrew Israelite too, but I don't believe in the New Testament. You don't believe in the New Testament. What? So it can get a little wild there. But he comes to me, my cousin, and he's filling up my inbox with all of these type of things. Now, when it comes to the Hebrew Israelites, I have my theory of how things go, and I think my theory is actually pretty much right on track. Here we go. We black folks, our ancestors are hauled over here from Africa. We're brought to this side of the world. We're oppressed. We're enslaved. Our names are taken away from us. Our religions are prohibited. Can't do that stuff because, our oppressors did not know what we were up to with our languages and our religions and our drums and everything like that. So they try to suppress all of that. So you don't remember your name. They separated families, You left Africa. You may have been a young 14-year-old. You've been plucked away from your mom, from your family, and you're on this side of the world. You're completely detached, completely brainwashed, completely remade into something else when you get onto this side of the world. This went on for what? Anywhere as little as 200 and something years to as much as 400 years. And over the time, our identity is completely lost to us. We know we have black skin. We know we can look over and see another person looking like us, but they come from an entirely different part of Africa, an entirely different tribe, probably have different customs altogether. Can't really unite because we're different. And that's one of the things, because a lot of people think Africa or Africans are monolithic. There's this, whether people know it or not, or realize that they're doing, they tend to think of Africa or Africans as being monolithic, or they all come from one country. No, different. So you have all of this going on. We have no identity. We're oppressed. We're downtrodden, beaten down. Well, when it came to slavery, there were some black people who eventually bought their freedom or had quote unquote masters who were benevolent, who would go and purchase them only to teach them how to read and then free them. Or others who just gained a conscience one day and just decided, hey, you know what? I'm freeing all these people. So you had African Americans who became pretty good at reading. And one of the first book that many enslaved Africans or formerly enslaved Africans came in contact with was the Bible. Now, once you could read, it didn't take you long after you started reading through the Bible to notice a similarity with the African plight, or the enslaved Africans' plight, or enslaved African Americans, Afro-Caribbeans, Afro-Central Americans. It wasn't hard to notice an oppressed people in the Bible known as Israel. And you're looking down and it's like, wow, these people were oppressed in Egypt for 450 years. We've been enslaved for a good lengthy period of time. And after a while, there became this movement or this belief that we, black people, our enslaved ancestors, could relate to the ancient Israelites and say, we're like them. Look at what they went through. And God delivered them. We're enslaved. according to when you were reading this, we're enslaved or we're just freely out of slavery. And we believe that God is also on our side. We can relate to those people. We're like them. But then there was a shift. And I think the shift took place after slavery ended, at least here in the United States. And there was a shift that went from we are like these people to, you know what? We're actually those people. Those people are us. We're just a modern, or we're just their descendants. But those same people who were enslaved in Egypt back then are us today, also enslaved or just coming out of slavery. So there was a shift that went from we're like them, so in terms of symbolism, was symbolic, to literal, we are them. Once a shift took place, then it gave room for people like a Frank Cherry or William S. Crowdy to come into play. For example, Frank Cherry, he taught that God hated white people and that Jesus was going to come back. I think he said in the year 2000. I don't know if he was the one that made that prediction. And he was going to destroy the whites and install black people as the superior race and the superior people. Then you had William Crowdy, who traveled around the United States preaching that Jesus was black. The interesting thing about him is that his first few converts were actually white. But he was not exactly out there teaching hatred or anything like that. He wasn't necessarily condemning other people per se, but it's only a logical jump that if you believe that you're special, you're unique, you're God's only people and whatever, it's only logical to eventually get to a point where you're going to feel like, well, if we're special, if we're God's chosen people, well, that means those other people over there cursed or something is wrong with them. We're his special folks. Of course, there was Abba Bivens later on down the line. So, how I see it, we're oppressed, we're downtrodden, beaten down, Jim Crow, slavery, segregation, all of that is going on. Lost our identity, have no idea who we are. It was very easy for people to come, people who were well-read, to look over certain things and come to you and say, pick your head up, black man. Pick your head up, black woman. Don't be downtrodden. You're special. You're unique. Not only that are you special and unique, this is how special and unique you are. You are part of God's chosen people. God's selected people. How much more special can you be than to believe that the God of the universe, who created all things, and this massive universe that's out there that you can't even span, that between all the stars, all the planets, everything that's out there, he's looking down and saying, you, Jaquan, you are one of his special people. Sit back and you start thinking to yourself. And you have to remember, many black people, because of their circumstance, and this is why the Nation of Islam, for example, sells so well in prisons, because you're up against a wall. You're out there probably hustling. Whatever it was. You may have been hurting people, or you may have been hustling to help your family out. And next thing you're in jail. Seems like all is lost. And someone shows up and basically tells you, hey, listen, you're special, you're unique. Do you know where you come from? Do you know who your people are? Do you know where you come from? You used to hear the whole thing about, do you know you come from kings and queens? As if to say everyone over there were kings and queens. Some of us were actually enslaved people over there. Do you know you come from kings and queens? Be proud. Look at what the Egyptians did. Look at what the Nubians did. Look at the brilliant civilizations they built. Those are the people you come from. Lift your head up. Be proud. Beat your chest. That was one thing. Then it went from, well, not only that, you're also unique and special in the eyes of God. God of the universe. You're his unique special snowflake. And people who look like you are all part of that snowflake group. Feel special about yourself. So it was very easy to then sell that and package that to a broken, downtrodden, oppressed people who were looking for something they can hold on to and cling to. And it's the old carrot on the stick mentality that's been going on since whenever. You might be poor now. You might be downtrodden now. You might be beneath the feet of the white man for now. But at some point in time, God is going to deliver you. In Christianity, it's don't worry about what's going on in this world right now. Don't worry about the sufferings you're going through. Don't worry about... I sound like a minister right now. Don't worry about all the troubles and trials and tribulations you're going through, because Jesus is in heaven building a mansion just for you, where you'll walk on streets of gold. Death will be no more. Suffering will be no more. And all those bad people that are oppressing you, they're going to end up in hell. They're going to end up in the pits of fire. But you, because you're following God, because you're God's special person, you're going to be sitting right next to him in heaven. Hebrew Israelites, similar type of idea. Don't worry about stuff. Whatever is going on right now, you're God's special people. You're cursed right now, but hey, just follow his precepts, follow his laws, and guess you'll be on the right side with him when judgment comes. Same similar type of thing. But anyway, I did mention the fact that I was going to touch in Deuteronomy chapter 28. And I said I was not going to go through verse by verse and whatever. Now, understand, there is an actual way to look at this chapter, and there's a way not to look at the chapter. Hebrew Israelites take this as their bread and butter scripture to say, this proves that we are the true Israelites. Now, here's my question that I've always wanted to ask, or I always ask, like I asked my cousin. Okay, I accept the idea that I'm a Hebrew Israelite. I accept the idea that I'm a descendant from the Hebrew Israelites, from the ancient Israelites and so on. For all I know, I could possibly be. As a matter of fact, part of my DNA does show that I have ancestry coming from at least the Levant area, which we'll call Palestine today. Shows that it stretched from there, and it looks like it migrated across the Mediterranean, across to Italy, and then over to Iberia. So part of my descent, my ancestry is Portuguese, but not just Portuguese, it shows Portuguese too. So for all I know, that's a whole other story. I won't get into that right now, right? So we have that going on, and I have asked my cousin before, okay, so say I accept all of this, to what you're telling me. Okay, all right, I'm a Hebrew Israelite. I'm one of God's special people. What's the end game? What does it do for me? What goes on next? If you're trying to tell me this to make me feel like a proud black man, what if I tell you I'm already a proud black man? I know the history of Africa and Africans. Probably better than a lot of people, and there are a lot of people who know far more than I do. But I'm not some person that's walking around the place couldn't tell you that there are 54 African nations, couldn't point each one of them out on a map to you and tell you where they are, and tell you something special about the various regions of Africa, and at least some information about the history of different parts of Africa. So I am a proud black man. I am black. I am not denying that by any stretch. I am actually very proud to be. And not only proud to be, I'm also proud to be from the Caribbean. I just looked like I couldn't see myself wanting to be born anywhere else in the world. The Caribbean, maybe Africa, but the Caribbean. That's where I'm from. So I am proud already. I'm not looking around like, well, I'm trying to hide that I'm black and I don't want people to know I'm black, and no. You're going to see me, I'm black, and you're going to know I'm black by my culture, by the way I speak, by the foods that I eat, the way I live my life, and the way I talk about Africa as a continent, not forgotten. Then, if that's not the case, I'm already a proud black man. What are you telling me? Is it going to make me a better father? To be perfectly honest with you, I consider myself to be an exceptional father. And this is corroborated by other people and even my children. Is it going to make me a better husband? If you know my relationship with my wife and what people know about us, you will know that I absolutely adore my wife. I literally worship the ground this woman walks on. And she thinks so highly of me. So when it comes to making me a better husband, I'm that already. My mother has had few problems with me growing up from since I was young. She thinks I'm an exceptional son. So it's not making me any better than I am. So what's going to be the end game then? It's not going to work with me because I'm already kind of where you think these beliefs will take me. But I could see how it will benefit or appeal to someone who's out there going through a whole lot. Gone through a whole lot. Probably prison. Probably just feel like they're not going anywhere in life. Don't have the education. Nothing. And you come to them and tell them, listen, lift your head up, young man. Lift your head up, black man. Lift your head up, black woman. You're not a whore anymore on the streets, as people would say. You are not some gangster on the street anymore. Now recognize who you are. Recognize your identity. Recognize your history. And you can feel like, whoa, okay. Put my shoulder up. I'm special. God's special people. So when I ask, what's the end game? Is that all you're going to tell me? So the other thing is, the other end game is, well, there's the other part. Well, if you follow these beliefs, that God up there is going to come back, or he's going to be angry at this world, or he's about to bring judgment. You want to get on the right side of him. If you get on the right side, you could avoid all this stuff. So, you want to kind of get on the bandwagon because you want to be on the right side of all of this, So it becomes that bribe of, hey, bad things are going to happen, and you kind of want to be on the good side. So just come over on the good side, with us, and you could save yourself all that trouble. So when I look at Deuteronomy chapter 28, I'm like looking at it like, okay, all right, so except we're the ones it's talking about. The curses are upon us and whatever. Okay, what next? What next? Are you going to say to me, well, you want to make sure you don't, because what this is basically saying is that we're still under this curse. That you individually following the precepts of God according to the Bible doesn't take away the curses. It's like we have to collectively come back as a people to God and follow collectively. All of us have got to come back and acknowledge that the God of the Bible is our God and follow his precepts. And then he'll remove the curses. So me individually following it is not going to stop it from hitting everybody else or even me myself. And do we think at some point in time that all the black people on this side of the world that you consider to be Hebrew Israelites are going to wake up one day and like, yeah, I think we need to follow God so we can get rid of these curses? Look at yourself in the mirror and say, you think that's going to happen? You really believe that's going to happen? That all black people, like you think we're monolithic, we're all going to think the same thing, believe the same thing, going to whip into shape and like, yeah, Hebrew Israelites, to see what you're talking about. We're going to follow this thing, so we can get rid of these curses. I can go out on a limb and say that's not going to happen. So what next? Do we continue enduring these curses into perpetuity, where there's no end in sight? Anyway, getting ahead of myself here, or getting behind, I should say. So for example, Deuteronomy chapter 28:68. The first thing that jumps out at me when I see this here, this is one of the things that Hebrew Israelites jump on. It says, and the Lord shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships, by the way whereof I spake unto thee, thou shalt see it no more again. Now you have to find out that there are other places, I think in the book of Exodus and earlier parts of the book of Deuteronomy, where God told the people, I'm not going to bring you back this way again. I'll never bring you back this way again. But here he's saying, I'm going to bring you back to Egypt then. If you don't follow these, I'm going to bring you back to Egypt in ships, to a place where I told that you will never ever see again. But because you don't follow my laws, I'll bring you right back. And it says, and there you shall be sold to your enemies for bondmen and bondwomen, and no man shall buy you. What was the point of the transatlantic slave trade? Making money. The purchase, that was the whole point. The purchase of Africans was what made it possible. It wasn't like ships were showing up with enslaved people and they weren't buyers. It says here, no man shall buy you. It wasn't like people were like, yeah, I see you're bringing over some enslaved people, but I'm not in the mood. I don't feel like buying those kind of people. I'm not into that. That was not what was happening. That was the whole point of the transatlantic slave trade. That's what made it profitable. Buying enslaved people, or buying people to enslave them. That was the whole point. Then the other thing about it is how the chapter ends. It's as if it's saying, now Hebrew Israelites say, well, see, it's talking about the transatlantic slave trade. But if you look at how this is written, it is written where it goes through all these curses and all these pronouncements of what's going to happen to you if you do not follow the ways of God. And it seems as though it's saying at the very end of all of this, if you don't do this, I'm going to smite you with this, that, whatever. And then the crowning achievement to my curses is I'm going to send you back to Egypt. It's not like, let me send you back to Egypt or into bondage, as Hebrew Israelites like to use the word Egypt here. It's not like, let me send you into bondage first, and then all of these things are going to happen to you. Because if you look at our experience as African Americans, Afro-Caribbeans, if you look at our experience, our ancestors were brought over here, and then all of those other things started happening. Not the other way around. It wasn't like we were in Africa or we were wherever we were in the world before we were dragged over here into slavery. It wasn't like over there we were going through all of these curses and then we came over here and that was the end result. Like how the book of the chapter is basically saying. The end result was after all these things happened to you, then on top of that, the crowning moment of these curses, I'm going to send you right back to Egypt. You're going to lose your land. And I'm going to send you back to Egypt. No, it was actually the other way around. It tells, and there's another thing that I have to say here, and boy, I'm going to really get carried away here. In here, some of the curses that are spoken about, now I'm not going through every verse, but some of the curses spoken about here. One part, I think in verse 53, it talks about a siege or sieges. And it talks about cannibalism, where because of these sieges, because you're being besieged by enemy nations all around, the women are going to be forced to boil their children, eat the children that come from between their legs just to survive. Are there any accounts of this happening on the African continent? Yes, there was cannibalism in certain places like Benin and so forth, but those were more for sacrifices. But in other parts of Africa, all around Africa, do we know of a point in time when there were enemies who were coming into Africa, coming around different groups and besieging? That probably happened for real because they were into tribal warfare. But do we know of anything about African women eating their children during these sieges? When it comes to these sieges in Africa and so forth, it was, other than if you were talking about a place like Timbuktu, most of these places weren't surrounded by fortified walls like you had in places like Jerusalem in Israel, or in other parts of the world where you had huge walls and you had to besiege them and break the walls down. Most of these places in Africa, around their walls were basically, stacks of wood and fences. They could easily just topple over or burn. But here's talking about siege and cannibalism. How do you explain that? When did that happen? Here's another thing. There's another verse in here that talks about when God was done with these people, you will be left few in numbers. Look around the world right now. Do you think black people are actually few in numbers by any stretch? In the United States alone, there's like 46 million African Americans as of 2016. That number's most likely gone up. There is another 40 million of us in the Caribbean alone. Go down to South America, you're probably talking about another 400 million when you consider Brazil. So when you consider South America with roughly 400 million and North America with another probably 400 million, that sounds like few in numbers to you? Now, if you look at the actual people who consider themselves to be Jews, who Hebrew Israelites claim are not true Jews, their population in the world is extremely small in relation to other places. There's probably about 15 million Jews in the entire world. People who call themselves Jews. Not talking about Hebrew Israelites, mind you, but people who consider themselves to be Jews. That's a minuscule number in relation to the rest of the population in the world. But we black folks? Then we're not even throwing in Africa. Because consider the fact, do you think that every single, oh boy, this is a whole other story. Because, of course, part of Hebrew theology, and I'm not saying all of them believe this, I really don't know, they believe that there's a separation, that only Africans who were descendants of Shem were taken out and brought to the side of the world. So there was a distinction. So the Africans that are over there today are Hamites. They're not Shemites. But this is like saying that there was a marked distinction. And they believe that the Hamites, the Africans who were Hamites, knew who were the actual Hebrew Israelites in Africa. And they only enslaved them. And brought, well, not enslaved them, but captured them and sold them to the Europeans to be brought on this side of the world. Like there was a clean cut. Like these African tribes are going around and like, hey, leave that tribe alone. No, they're Hamites. Oh, those guys over there, they're Shemites. Let's go after them instead. So the belief is that somehow all of the Shemites or all of the Hebrew Israelites are taken out and brought to this side of the world, leaving only Hamites behind. As if there were no possibility that the Hebrew Israelites who were of the Shemites did not escape, did not move further inland, did not get away, and still have communities there. So you toss those people in who survived, who escaped, and if you consider them to be Hebrew Israelites, imagine their numbers that they have created over there in Africa. So trust me, we're not few in number by any stretch of the imagination. Few in number is what it says. Then there's another thing that I've always been curious about. When the Babylonians under Nebuchadnezzar came and invaded Judah, the kingdom of Judah, remember, he took the cream of the crop. I think there were 2 invasions where he took away people from the land of Judah. He took them to Babylon, not to Africa. Now, it is true that there were some Israelites or some Jews, Judahites, who escaped Nebuchadnezzar's invasion. Remember I just mentioned that a minute ago? Who escaped Nebuchadnezzar's invasion and ran into Egypt. Could they have been scattered all across Africa at that point? Sure, just like what I was just mentioning. Could some of these Hebrews or Israelites and so on ended up eventually in places like West Africa? Of course. That is one thing I don't deny. I'm not going to sit here and say, well, hey, there was never any Israelites who made it into Africa. No, they escaped. The book of Jeremiah told you that some of them escaped into Egypt, eventually founding the Jewish community in Alexandria, Egypt. That doesn't mean that's the only place where they went to, but that's where the majority of them apparently ended up. And I'm sure a lot of them, or some of them, eventually migrated, wandered off, ended up in places like we call Libya today, ended up in places Mauritania, probably ended up in places we call Ghana today and Nigeria and so on, traveled the trade routes and went their separate ways and started communities in other places. I'm not denying that. Jewish customs probably traveled along these routes also. And that's the other thing. Who knows if Jewish culture, Jewish beliefs didn't cross the Sahara along the trade routes ended up in places like Africa, and those Africans converted to Judaism. Not that they were actual Hebrew Israelites, but teachings, because remember, those trade routes not only were goods and spices going back and forth, but there were also religious ideas going back and forth. Who's to say that you didn't have an African tribe like the Hebrew Israelites believe about the Khazars, who heard these Jewish beliefs and were like, oh, I like what I'm hearing. It sounds pretty interesting. Let's go ahead and follow what this book says they call the Torah. Let's start following it. And you go over there, 2,000 years later, and find out that there's a group of Africans who follow certain Jewish practices. And you sit back and say, well, they're Hebrew Israelites. By conversion, they are. But my question was, when Nebuchadnezzar took, I shouldn't say my question, but my point is, when Nebuchadnezzar took these Jews or Judahites from Judah and took them to Babylon, remember, not all of them, they did not all come back after 70 years of exile. When the Persians defeated Babylon under Cyrus the Great, yes, Cyrus the Great, being the benign and benevolent ruler that he was, he allowed the Jews to go back home to their homeland to rebuild their temple. He did not force anyone, as far as we know. It's just for those Jews who wanted to go back home, because you had some Jews who were like, you know what, yeah, I want to go back home to my homeland. Okay, you're free to go. I'll underwrite your trip. I'll pay for everything. You guys can go back home and rebuild your temple. But from what we understand, a lot of these Jews ended up staying in Babylon over the 70 years. I like this place. Nice cosmopolitan city. It was like the New York City of the day. Like, hey, I like this place, man. I don't want to go back to some old rural place down there, that my father said he came from. I want to stay here in Babylon. And a large Jewish community stayed there up until modern times in modern Iraq. Until Zionism came along and frightened them out of Iraq and brought them back to what we call Israel today. But 2,500 years went by, there was a Jewish community there in Babylon, or in what we call Iraq today, or Mesopotamia. Whatever happened to those people? So the focus is always on, well, hey, they ran into Africa, or they're in Africa, or they ended up in Africa, the Hebrew Israelites went there. What happened to those Iraqi, Babylonian, Mesopotamian Jews who were there up until the 1940s? What did they look like? After 2,500 years of probably mingling and mixing and whatever, what did they look like? I am sure you could go up there, you definitely can find black people in Iraq. Black people were probably Jewish. But up until the 1940s, you have records of that same Jewish, a continuity of continuity of that population of Jews who who were exiled to Babylon by Nebuchadnezzar, who never left there and went back to Jerusalem when Cyrus gave the order or gave the permission for them to go back. They stayed. They formed a whole community. Even when you read in the New Testament, you hear, I think in one of the epistles of Peter, and to the saints in Babylon. All the way up to this day and age. Whatever happened to them? You never hear Hebrew Israelites talking about them. And who said that's where they stayed? They could have migrated into other parts. They could have gone into other areas. They could have gone into the Caucasus Mountains. They could have gone to India. They could have gone to China. We don't know. Well, at least I don't know right now. Whatever happened to them? Why don't we talk about them? Who are their descendants today? Hebrew Israelites have this narrow focus that says it's just us through a transatlantic slave trade. Were there people who could say that their descendants came from the ancient land of Israel? Most likely. Was there this unique thing, this nice little package of the only people on these slave ships are Hebrew Israelites, that in between are not mixed in Hamites? As if to say, These people were like these people were into the slave trading over there, were people of such integrity. Then it's like, yeah, I'm not going to go sell Bob because Bob is a Hamite like me. Let me go look for somebody. No. No, we still see to this very day, black people are out here selling poison to one another. Their friends, their neighbors. You think they care? About, oh, well, we're from the same block. We look alike. You think they care? It's about making the money. That African tribes were leaving where they were to go next door and capture, kill, but most likely capture other people, other Africans on the same continent, to bring them to the shoreline to sell them to white Europeans to bring onto this side of the world. They did not care. Well, hey, Europeans, I can't do that, man. That's our neighbors over there. They're Africans just like us. No, we can't do that. No. It was profit making. It was all about buying. And the chapter tells you that none would want to buy you. None? Oh my goodness. That was where the money was. Buying. Spending money. Trading goods to buy people. They wanted to buy people. That's what drove the profits. That's what drove the mechanism of slavery. Live bodies to do work, to bring in wealth. So, when it comes to all of this, there are other passages in here that I could go to, or other verses I could go to, that shows it just doesn't apply to black folks from the transatlantic slavery forward. Again, the chapter ends with them going back to Egypt. But before that, as if to say, in your land, where you live right now in Africa, before you even go back into bondage, before you go back into Egypt, but we'll go ahead and say that means bondage. Before you go into bondage, all of these things are going to happen to you. It's going to be like a cascade leading all the way down. And then the end result is, I'm going to send you back to Egypt. I'm going to put you back in bondage. The way the chapter actually reads is that it's talking about physical Egypt. And I'm going to put you right back into Egypt where you were. I told you we're not going to go back there. When I delivered you, you're not going to go back there. But if you don't follow my precepts, you're going to go right back to where you were. When it came to the transatlantic slave trade, it would mean that somehow African Americans or Hebrew Israelites who were once here in the Americas, South, Central, the Caribbean, North America, were once there as enslaved people, suffering all these curses, and then somehow they cried out, God delivered them, brought them back to, I guess, to Israel, and then they didn't follow the precepts, and God said, okay, you're going to go right back to where that bondage was, in the Americas. That never happened. That's not the way history went down. And here's another thing, and hopefully this is going to end it. When you say things like that, then it makes no sense whatsoever, because Africans who were enslaved or brought to this side of the world also came from East Africa. It's kind of forgotten a lot. The Portuguese, remember, they had colonies on East Africa, over in Zanzibar, over in Tanzania, over in those areas over there. They also brought enslaved Africans from East Africa all the way around the bottom of Africa and brought them over to Brazil. Now, of course, the Arabs, of course, more or less controlled East Africa, the slaves, but the Portuguese also were involved over there. And another thing is, Hebrew Israelite theology does not take into account the vast diversity amongst the diaspora of Africans. It focuses solely on Hebrew Israelites. So the people over on this side of the world are actual literal descendants specific to that land of Israel. And all the other Africans that came over here, everyone else, like somehow, let's forget about them. They did not make it over here. They weren't on these slave ships. The thing is, when they did genetic tests, they found out that the Lember tribe down in Zimbabwe, they have pretty much confirmed that these people are descendants of those ancient, their xenotype and all of that. They're descendants of, sorry about that. of those ancient peoples. What they have not found, though, is any big, vast genetic connection to the ancient land of Israel and people in West Africa. Would you find spots and sporadic groups here and there? It's very possible. I think that's happened before. But remember, some of those people or groups that you're seeing in West Africa that say that they're ancient, they're Hebrews or they're Israelites, you have to understand, some of those groups may have just been simply converted to Judaism from thousands of years ago. Judaism came along the trade routes. They probably followed those traditions, circumcision, kosher food, and you may see it and just think, see, there's evidence. How do we know those people weren't just converts and not actual literal blood descendants of people who came from the land of Israel? I would not say that you don't have people in between, interspersed in between these groups of people who could not probably trace that. But just because we see it, we think, hey, they must be. That would be like 10,000 years from now, someone looks back and there's still the Nation of Islam is still around, and you look back and you say, whoa, all those black people, well, I guess they must have been Arabs. See, they're following the same thing that the Muslim Arabs do. So we're looking back in archaeology, and that's what they did. So they must have been they must have been Arabs. You look back and you realize, no, they were just simply converts to Islam, but they're not Arabs. Anyway, so much more that I could possibly say in regard to this. There's a whole lot of holes in the argument. Some things that just don't make any sense. There's more here from the book of Deuteronomy chapter 28 that you can look at, and you can see this. Now again, if this is what you want to believe, you're not harming anybody, and you're out there and this is what you want to believe, you believe that you are God's chosen special person or special people or part of God's special people, great. I could sit here and think the same exact thing. Doesn't pay one bill. Doesn't affect my life. Doesn't really change anything. It's still going to be me. I don't have to put on any special clothing. I don't have to go to any special building. I don't have to listen to some guy preaching to me. It doesn't change anything about me at all. But I could understand some people need this in their lives to make them feel better about themselves. So it would make sense there. Me, on the other hand, I personally don't need it. But I must say, Hebrew Israelites don't come knocking on my door and trying to preach to me. They don't come and try to force their religious beliefs down my throat. I don't see them actually walking around the street bothering anybody per se. They're not like the Jehovah's Witness again, coming to your door and coming into your personal space and trying to talk to you. But I do know, for those that you see on the streets, if you go out there and you encounter with them, then they will talk to you. They'll discuss with you. They may have an argument with you. Or they may just try to enlighten you on what they believe. So yeah, no one is bothering me. So these videos are not a response to Hebrew Israelites trying to convert me. No. Just my thoughts, just my ideas. Some of you may not agree, some of you may. And some of you might be like, dude, shut up, man. Where you coming with that stuff? I get it. But it helps me to pass away my lunch hour sometimes. So this is where I'm at, hanging out here. So thank you guys for hanging out with me, okay? Let me end this video. I was just all over the place. But hopefully you find something in there that you can come into the comment section to talk about. You can ask a question about. Or you can come in and say, no, you got it all wrong. This is so and so and so. I know there's a bunch of you out there who say you want to debate me and you want to introduce me to the grand poobah, of your faith or whatever, to learn me a lesson and show me the truth. Whenever you do, let me know. All right, you guys take care. Thank you so much for looking at this video. I really appreciate it. Share, like, tell your other Hebrew Israelite friends about it. Let's see what they say. Okay? Take care. Bye.